Good afternoon. How's everyone doing today? Great to see you. Thanks for coming out. I'm Mario Rosero. I have the great pleasure of being the Senior Vice President of Education at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And on behalf of our President, Deborah Rutter, and our Chairman, David Rubenstein, I bring warm-hearted greetings. We're really thrilled to be here to talk about our nation's cultural center and our education programs. So we're going to move to the first slide here. Maybe. Thank you. Because we're talking about our national networks for our programs across the country. So most folks know the Kennedy Center for the performing arts component, but there are actually three pillars to the institution that really make up our unique identity. And that has to do with the world-class artists on our stages, our powerful education programs across the country, which are really the strongest national component, and then our role as the living memorial to President Kennedy. And in the legislation, when the Kennedy Center came into being nearly 50 years ago, we're at our 47th year, it was written into the legislation that that education component was just as strong as the artistic component. And so we're going to explore a broad look at those networks today, but we're going to really focus in on two of them. When we focus down on that second pillar of powerful education, just to set the context, if the Kennedy Center is working on a national level and scope, we also have a home base in DC, and what we often do is collect challenges from the field as well as best practices in arts and arts education. And we marry those two things together to develop model programs that we can expand and we can share and we can distribute and disseminate across the country. So we have multiple different education networks that we work with, from professional development to training for young artists, to teaching artists in the classroom, to collaborations that really focus around strategy. And through those networks, we're able to take these lessons that we learn in our own backyard in DC and nearby areas and really spread them across the country. But it's what I'd love for you to take away is that this is a conversation and a back and forth with our partners and our community members at each of our local community sites across the nation. And so here you can get a sense on this heat map of the depth of programs across the country. So what you see here is where there are the tallest pillars with the red at the top. Those are our deepest locations of impact in terms of education programs across the US. Now, I find this interesting that when we look at the direct number of students served through Kennedy Center education programs, we're at 1.4 million students annually. Also, in the actual building on our 9 stages through 2,000 performances, we're also reaching 1.4 million audience members. So it's interesting that there's some balance there. Additionally, through the networks, because if you consider a teacher being trained through a program or strategy being built with a district, there's another 10 million students that are reached beyond through that network. So that's the interconnected piece of that, which is train the teacher, work with the systems and structures, and build the capacity of the local. And we're going to see more in that in one of our programs as we talk about. But additionally, in terms of 50 states, we're also in Puerto Rico, we're in DC, and 26 countries across the world. So if we narrow in, one specific program that I want to talk about is the Any Given Child program. And the Any Given Child program is about 9 years old, and it's a collective impact program. And what that means is communities, the school district, the mayor's office, and the arts community come together and say, we want to prioritize the arts for our community. And we want to work with the Kennedy Center to identify what are the gaps and the opportunities for pre-K to 8th grade in terms of arts education in a district. And currently we have 25 sites that are tackling this work, but it's really built on equity and on access. Here you can see in this map the 25 sites that are interconnected across the country. We have everywhere from here in Austin, Texas, to small Warren, Ohio, to Southern Nevada and Las Vegas, Juneau, Alaska, Meridian, Mississippi, San Juan, Puerto Rico, as well as Albuquerque. These sites annually come together at an annual exchange where they share best practice and strategy. So at this time, I'm going to welcome my colleague, Hakim Bellamy, in a second. Hakim has multiple roles at the Kennedy Center, and I'm thrilled to welcome him to talk more about Albuquerque and the Any Given Child program there. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hakim,
hey.
Hi.
Hi, Mario. How are
doing?
you? I'm well, thank you.
Great. So we're going to talk about a few different networks. We want to start with Any Given Child, and I'm so thrilled that Hakim could join us because of his multiple roles that he really plays in Albuquerque and his relationship with the Kennedy Center. But we love this President Kennedy quote that you see on the screen that really talks about as we look to the future, and the importance that we place for our civilization, it's that recognition in the place of the artist that's so critical. And the Kennedy Center absolutely leans on President Kennedy quotes quite often, but what we find is they're so timeless and they really have resonance. And when we think about our programs, we always reflect back to President Kennedy's legacy as we take a look ahead. So Hakim, I'm so glad you could join.
Yes, thank you.
Hakim is a poet, but also has had multiple roles with the city of Albuquerque, and currently is just moved into a new role, Deputy Director,
Yes.
Cultural Affairs
Yes.
in the city of Albuquerque, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Hakim also has been a critical part of the Any Given Child team in Albuquerque. So we're really taking this bird's eye view of programs across the country, looking at just Any Given Child, and now we're going into one site, which is Albuquerque, New Mexico. So when we look at Albuquerque, to just get us some context here, we have a little over 500,000 folks living in the area. When we look at the school system, 84,000 students in pre-K to 12 with 142 schools, 31st largest.
Big.
Correct?
Yes, big.
And then this program, Any Given Child, is primarily focused on K to 8. So then we see there's really 62,000 plus students that are directly impacted by this program. We're talking about 123 schools for that K to 8 piece. So we're going to hear a little bit from Hakim about what this program actually is on the ground and unpack it a little bit. So I'm just going to add a little bit more context, and then I want to get into some back and forth here.
Sure.
So the collective impact component is really about having a community arts team that is uplifted from the artistic sector, from philanthropy, from policymakers, teachers in classrooms, teaching artists, principals. You have this group of people, anywhere from 25 to about 30 individuals across the sites, that really come together on a regular basis, and they have committed to putting individual, personal, organizational agendas to the side and say, we're really going to focus on equity and access for arts education for our K to 8 population. That is our single goal. And it involves a lot of looking at data, but also some compromise and some prioritization. So that's the context of the process. And for Any Given Child, it's a 4-year window, even though schools have stayed in, or districts have stayed in for the full 9 years to date. But I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what it was like to go into that planning process and what your role ended up being in that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. So in Albuquerque, we're the most recent cohort of Any Given Child. We came on with 2 other cities, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and Meridian, Mississippi. And we were the not necessarily respectively, 23rd, 24th, and 25th Any Given Child cities. So we've been doing this work for about 1.5 years now, and it was just coincidental that I'd, about 6 months earlier, been asked to serve at the request of the mayor of Albuquerque, the previous mayor of Albuquerque, and work in education. And so since I happened to be on the 11th floor, our city hall is 11 floors, I happened to be on the 11th floor when this opportunity came, and mayors are busy people, and he was like, I can't go to all those meetings. And he was like, but my former poet laureate back here is a guy that is really involved in that kind of work. He'd be happy to go to these meetings. it was serendipitous that the creative action team is made up of frontline teaching artists who go into these schools and do our best to work with as many children as possible, as many children as resources allow, or organizations that do the same thing if they're not individual artists. And I was one of those too. So it was just convenient that I kind of was on this administrative bureaucratic side, coming in representing the mayor of Albuquerque, and then also being in those meetings saying, you know, I know what it's like to have access or not have access to students. I know that the schools I get to work in that benefit me as a professional artist, because before I was working for the mayor, I was a full-time poet. Imagine that. And, and it was like, you know, that was my gig. That was, you know, those opportunities were important to me because that's the work I wanted to be doing, and it also helped me feed my 10-year-old son. And so I knew that a lot of it was kind of like who you know and what you know. That if there were really cool principals and really teachers that were great advocates for you, that's how you would get into a school, and there would be another school just as deserving on the other side of town that didn't have that principal and didn't have that teacher. So it was great for me and the kids that I was fortunate enough to be in front of, but it wasn't scalable. It didn't allow me to think about what could happen, what is possible if I could serve more students, and not necessarily for more resources. And so what the Kennedy Center took about, I think our first CAT team meeting, there were about 45 organizations represented at it. It took 45 people like me to come together and said, okay, instead of us competing for that one gig at that one school, what if we made a plan to see how many kids and how many students could benefit from us working together?
Yeah, because what we find is that arts education really takes an ecosystem, right? We would love to lean on school districts to primarily provide that opportunity, and oftentimes they're doing really great work, and it's an uphill battle, but everyone's really fighting for the right thing to make sure that that equity and access exists. But what we find is that it also takes the community that surrounds it, the teaching artists, the local organizations, the philanthropy, to really ensure that students have the most opportunity possible. So I think we see those trends. So as folks first sat down to have that conversation, what were some of the things on the wish list that came up?
Well, the first part was trying to divorce people of the idea that their future work, their ability to work and do this work in schools was dependent on, these individual contracts. And so getting everybody to divorce themselves from the idea that I don't want that artist coming in here and taking my gig or my work, and really getting people to kind of step back and say, okay, we have a systemic problem and it's only going to be solved by a systemic solution. And so I think that was the re-engineering that we had to do as a community, just with our mindset, to be able to get outside of ourselves for a collective good. After we did that, the dreams were huge. The dreams were grandiose, and only in year 1.5, we are still kind of in the infantile stages of what we're trying to do. But we do have a pilot program at Janet Kahn, which is one of our arts magnet schools, and we're looking at how to create professional development programs for teachers so that they understand what arts integration is and they actually get training on doing that. And if we can pilot it there and it works there, and it has been, then we will do that in 5 different parts of the city, and then those schools will serve as mentors to the other schools in that part of the city. And so just getting to the table to be able to plan that out with APS, with the mayor, and these opinion leaders and policy leaders really is moving us in a direction that I don't think we would have moved in before. I mean, the magnet schools existed, but they did not exist to replicate themselves. They only existed to serve a particular population of students who were being underserved.
Right. I think what you're probably hearing from Hakim's comments is that this is a really tailor-made program. So oftentimes I'll be speaking to a national audience and they want to know, what is it exactly, how much does it cost, and what are the outcomes? And what we find is that this program, we're really thankful for the success we've had because it takes that first year to really listen to the community. And it's really the design, which I've inherited at the Kennedy Center, was really designed to leverage our reputation to ensure that the right folks show up at the table, and then leverage our ability to facilitate those healthy conversations, right? And by coming in and having those dialogues and making sure that every voice is heard, you get those multiple perspectives that you need, But what you realize is even though the challenges in arts education are quite similar across the country, they play out to different amounts in every local community. And so the ability to listen and tailor to each community to make sure that you're meeting the needs that are most important, I think is why the program has been in existence for such a while and is working well.
What we've learned, Albuquerque's had the opportunity to go to a few exchanges now, and so the Kennedy Center convenes all of the Any Given Child cities for professional development on this particular program that we're all a part of. And in looking at cities that have been in it way longer than Albuquerque, the most impressive thing at the end of the day is not the ideas and the vision, it's the data that they produce. And the data is kind of your guard against the shifting political winds. You're gonna have a different mayor in 4 years, you're gonna have a different superintendent every so often. And so what really, I think, for the programs that have really been doing it for a while now, I am most impressed that they have data that proves their efficacy. A lot of that starts with the Kennedy Center. They come in and immediately ask you to do a baseline. And so you go to the school district, you try to get as much participation as possible from principals and teachers, as well as teaching artists and arts providers, to say what schools you go into, how many hours are you there, and what do you do? And so that's kind of, we get a baseline, and we get to see what parts of the city get a lot of attention from dance, and what part of the city gets more attention from visual arts, and then what part in schools get no attention at all. And so now we have a baseline, and we're able to begin to marshal our resources better, because it's not always about, we know in these times, these austeritist, that's not a word, times, we'll take poetic license, that there's no money anywhere, right? And everybody says, we'd love to do that, but we can't. And we're saying that actually you have lots of resources, and if you just deployed them more equitably, then we can begin to serve any given child, K through 8, with a meaningful and sustainable arts experience in our city.
That's right. So when Hakeem and I were prepping for this, we really thought long and hard about what we were each sort of bringing to the table, right? Not just for this conversation, but for this work that we're collaborating on. And so I often think back, I was in Chicago Public Schools as a director of the arts, and we did some really similar work of doing a listening tour with the community, doing sort of an audit of what was going on in the district, what existed, what didn't exist. And what we found was very similar common challenges and successes, but we didn't have common vocabulary. The terminology, even, you called the school to find out, what arts courses do you have and who's teaching them? If you talk to the clerk, the principal, or a teacher, you got 3 different answers. And so we found that there was a bit of an information campaign that had to happen. Let's get on the same page. What are the glossary of terms? And then we found out that we had an uneven landscape across nearly 700 schools and 400 elementaries in terms of arts offerings. But when we met with principals and decision makers, when we clarified the terms, and then we set a bar or an expectation for what arts learning should look like, what that investment should look like, just by having that bar clearly articulated, we saw more art-supported decision-making happening. Now, we went on to build a system that tracked the data from year to year to year and helped provide resources to address many of the gaps. But I was so happily surprised to see that just having that common expectation that we shared made a big difference. And I think Any Given Child is a really similar premise.
Absolutely. Having this, dual agency, if you will, as an artist and as, a government official, again, it's like you'll often hear electeds talk about arts from the experience of my daughter has this program at her school, or my son is engaged in this, and they have no real data to base any of their decisions on. And so how can we begin to advocate for more funding for anything if we don't actually speak the same language and we're not getting an actual accurate count of what's happening in these schools? And so it really gives ammo to our allies. I mean, those legislators and policymakers who are our allies desperately need that, because otherwise it's just episodic. It's like, my son's school arts is fine, so that's not going to be a priority of mine. And so it's not intentionally political in any way, but it does give, fuel to advocate for yourself and your community and bring people together around that, and especially people who are not necessarily engaged always in the political process. And so what we found in Albuquerque, what we found in Albuquerque is that a lot of what works for us is that parents will show up, right, for their child when their child is singing on stage or presenting a poem on stage or is in a dance recital. And so we're trying to figure out how do we better use that to achieve other goals for the school district, whether it's health goals or information goals. And so that makes us better community partners for people who aren't artists when we have an issue that we need their help on and we need them to advocate on our behalf as well. So
That's right. And so something you said makes me think, one of the core premises that we really try to articulate and convey on a regular basis to any of our education networks across the country is that lead with the arts positive statement. How many times in my career have I talked to someone, oh, what do you do? Oh, I work in arts education. Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
It's the first thing to go.
Right.
And I always counter that with, I know of a great arts investment or a great arts program or this great art teacher in this place that's really making a difference. And I try to lead with a positive to say, we have momentum and strategy that's moving in the right direction. Let's get more people on board with that direction, right? And I think we're seeing in the 25 Any Given Child sites that some of them have adopted nearby or neighboring districts who are interested in this work and want to gain from that. And we've gone so far that we're right now piloting our first pre-K to 12 model in DC. So we've been really working with that community for years to, because Any Given Child to us is also about readiness. We have a lot of sites that are interested. It's an application-based process. And the application really gives us an initial sense of data, talks about the priority of the arts in the district, it talks about strategy, and we do a site visit to see if that readiness and that support really exists. But for DC, we had to spend a few extra years in supporting them towards that readiness, and so we're really interested to see when you move beyond this K-8, and K-8 was the original model because that's when you can almost for certain say that you have that entire population of students on a similar schedule within the school building, but once you get to high school, you have more variability. So we're really curious to see what we find from that. And we're also doing a national evaluation of the program to say, we're almost at a decade's worth of implementation. What's really working and what's next? And so we're really excited to get that report later this year. Before we toggle to our next topic, we'll see if this works as a transition. I want you to speak a little bit more about your unique role as an artist in this work when you had that hat on. Because, from the center's perspective, we really value the role of the artist in society and know that you're a change maker and that you give voice and expression to what's happening in the world around us. So I wonder how that part of your identity came through in the first year and a half, 2 years of conversations and convenings for this work.
Sure. In Albuquerque, I think the simple answer is that I had some credibility in my community as an artist. And so when we got our CAT team together for the first time, there was a lot of wait and see. There were a lot of organizations who are doing amazing work, theater companies, our VSA, a very special arts program, was at the table, and they kind of had their arms up and like, let's see what the district and the city is up to this time, right? And so I think that I was able to be used to say, yes, I work for the mayor, but I think that this might work, and I think that if we give it our attention, especially in that first year, because that is probably the most intense year as far as frequency of meetings and really getting organized and developing your strategic plan, right? I pretty much, my job was just to say, stay on the ship through the first year, and once you get to the second year, we'll have things that we're doing, we'll have action. And the thing about arts and teaching artists is that we're like doers. We don't want to go sit in city council meetings. We don't want to go to budget meetings. I mean, we will if we have to. If there's going to be a vote on something, we'll show up and be colorful. But for the most part, we're like, let somebody else do that. We want to do the work and work with the population. And so this was asking a lot from people, and also people who are very busy. People who, like, especially if they were parts of arts organizations, they're like, another meeting, on a nonprofit budget, I don't know if I can afford the time. And so my job really was cheerleader in the beginning. And I think that being part of the community, because I'm busy too, you know, and they were like, well, if Hakim's gonna come, then you know, we should try to figure this out. What's most interesting about that though, Mario, is that there was so I left the mayor's office, and then there was a mayoral transition, and I've just been invited back under the new mayor. And so even after I transitioned out of the mayor's office, I was still a part of it. And I think that was meaningful, that I wanted to be a part of that work. I had spoke to Mayor Berry, the previous mayor, and said, you know, I'm happy to continue to hold space on this in this way, just because I'm committed to it. I've been part of it this long, right? And my skin in the game, my reputation, my relationship with these people is important to me, because I'm an artist here, and my 10-year-old son goes to all their camps. Like he's like everything that they do, he's a part of, and I'm really invested in seeing it become a thing. And it is a very unlikely story that you go from being a poet laureate of a city, a municipality, to working in the mayor's office, but it seemed like it was the right path for what I needed to do.
I think you need to be a trendsetter in this way. We would love to see more of this.
That was a JFK quote. We were talking about JFK quotes that we loved before, and I always butcher it, but the one about if politicians did more what poets do and poets did more about what politicians do, we'd be a lot better off, especially in the age of Twitter. But yeah.
You're gonna be our role model for that. You're gonna be our role model. Right. So I just want to, because we can take questions at the end, but I wanted to go back and look at our first map here. Okay. So one of the messages I really want to get across is that the Kennedy Center is this really unique moment where we've been spending the last few years really not questioning our identity in terms of we don't know who we are, but questioning our identity to say, what is the unique role that we really play in this work? We realize we're fortunate. We realize that we've got this amazing building, reputation, and artists that we work with. But we also don't want to be the organization that has all the answers. We want to be the organization that has all the questions. And we want to ask those questions and spend a lot of time listening so that our programs that we offer are responding to what the community or the stakeholders need. So I just wanted to go back to this map because the idea is really that we're able to identify through conversation with the community what the need is and then help uplift, right? So it's really community outwards, right? And so it's this concept that the Kennedy Center is it's not a building in DC, period. It's a concept, right? It's an idea, it's a set of principles that the arts really matter in our lives, right? So if we look at this broadest national piece, and then we go back to the Any Given Child network, we love this idea of those crisscrossing lines because the ability to convene. So when you're on the ground doing the work, you are busy and you are focused at what's in front of you, and you're probably having strategy for the work you're doing in front of you. But to be able to bring folks together and have this moment of seeing the bigger picture and seeing how the work interconnects and we learn from each other has been really powerful. And so one of the things I'm really committed to is to get more publication and dissemination of these best practices out in the field, right? So if you have any questions about those practices, those ideas, what we're finding as results, as well as some of the gaps we see, because we're really saying, what is our charge in terms of success in terms of a national reach? What does that look like? And so this program grows about 2 to 3 sites annually. And we know our 50th is coming up. I don't know that we'll get to 50 by 2021, but it's a nice rate of growth. But how do you prioritize the geography, the population, and what are the critical pieces of information such as population density or socioeconomic status or rural that really help you prioritize where those programs are going to be most beneficial? So just something else to think about.
Another piece of learning that I'll throw in, let me step back a second. For New Mexico, and I'm not a New Mexico native, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, but I've been there 13 years now. So for New Mexico, just to have the full weight of the Kennedy Center, helping us organize, right? Helping us organize on the ground in our creative community is huge. It's huge for me, it's huge for my students, some of which will never make it to Washington, D.C. to actually go to the Kennedy Center, that there is there are programs that are being sent to them. There's a few other programs that I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to work with in the past through the Santa Fe Opera and our other partners in education. So, you know, Kennedy Center's got its tentacles in New Mexico in lots of different ways, and that's huge for a state as resource impoverished as we are. A state that oftentimes ends up on the bottom of lists around teen pregnancy, around poverty, because we're rural. We're one of the least densely, sparsely populated states in the union, and so that it's just huge. It can't be understated how important that is. And so we're thankful to that for the Kennedy Center. But I think for Any Given Child specifically, what I've learned, or Albuquerque, if I can be so bold to speak on behalf, as a year and a half of being an Any Given Child site, is that when we convene and go through our kind of strategic planning process, we do have these goals that pop up. For example, one goal was that we want to create some structure, maybe even an accreditation or certification process around what it is to be a teaching artist. Certain things you need to know to go into classrooms in APS. It would make the teachers and administrators a lot more comfortable. They'd be more willing to spend money on it if they knew we went through some sort of badging process. And the artists knew that. Like, you know, we're not thrilled. We're like, don't tell us how to do our job. We won't tell you how to do yours. But we do know that the biggest barrier to bringing artists in is especially when you're like a slam poet, is we're afraid what the kids are gonna say. And we don't wanna get anybody in trouble. So what if we put them through a small orientation and they learn certain things, because not every artist is a teacher, right? I happen to be a high school teacher as well. So I play that role where I'm an intermediary, and I do understand the classroom dynamics and what I'm supposed to do, what I'm supposed to know, as well as how can I bring creativity into the classroom. And so how do we structure that so everybody goes through the same thing before they enter a classroom, right? And then we go to the exchange a couple months ago, last month, and we start talking to another city who's further down the path at Any Given Child, and they were like, yes, we already have a framework, you can have it here. And so that kind of, where we were in the bubble trying to create this thing that we were about to spend a whole lot of time on, that we looked at one of our partner cities and they were like, actually, we have a whole framework for that. You can borrow it and plagiarize it and use it as your own, even though plagiarize is not a good word to use in educational context. So,
borrow good ideas.
Borrow
good
right.
ideas. So I think we'll use this as a moment of transition, and what we're going to do is look at another national network, right? And this one's a little bit different. And this one, Hakeem is sort of the Venn diagram of where these things overlap. But it really talks to the other two pillars of the organization, which is the world-class arts and the memorial to President Kennedy. So I'm just going to get ahead to another map.
He said world-class. He's just saying nice things now to say it.
It's true. So as we look at this map, this really shows a new program. We're moving into our third year. This is the Citizen Artist Fellowship Program. And what this is, it's in that reflection time that I just talked about of the Kennedy Center really looking at who we are right now in the current day and what role do we play, we reflected back on President Kennedy's legacy. And these words kept coming up of service, justice, freedom, courage, and gratitude over and over again. And we call them our JFK ideals. And we just celebrated President Kennedy's 100th birthday last May. And as part of that celebration, we wanted to have some skin in the game to say, this is how we live up to those ideals. So we launched the Citizen Artist Fellowship Program, which honors artists that are working communities and using their art form to give back in a positive way, right? And these are artists that live up to those ideals. So our friend here is one of those citizen artists. And it was lovely to see that his community from Albuquerque and Any Given Child were the ones that nominated him. And so Hakim's been playing multiple roles with us, which has been so beneficial. And what we love about this program is that it's a real back and forth relationship. It's not one way out. So what you see here are the first 2 years represented on this map. We are just about to launch on April 16th, the third cohort. So I can't tell you right now where they're coming from and who they are, but we're really excited. And you can see we have some work to do in terms of how we identify communities to make sure that they're represented. Because this is about, once again, being responsive, but also having those different perspectives that help us understand what's really going on in communities, what are the struggles, and what role are artists playing. It's pretty simple. But we, I always like to say we take it slow. And this is a fellowship that we spend a year together, and we call it a year of conversation and learning. We keep it really elegant and simple. The first year we had 9 citizen artist fellows, and this year we had 7. We aim for 5. And we always have such a great argument, or we're looking at a balance of art forms and genres, et cetera. And I think this past year's cohort has been pretty tremendous because we really took a lot of time to get to know each other. So I'm just gonna give a little more framing, and then I'd love to hear Hakim
Dope.
talk about his experience.
And we're back.
All right, great. We're just keeping you on your toes, that's all. So the framing is there's a nomination process from the community, right? We average a little over 100 annually. We're working to get that number up. And it goes through multiple layers of selection, but once they, the artist commits, we have an annual art summit every spring that really talks about the role of arts in society. And the citizen artists attend that as a participant and as a member of the audience. It's a orientation to the Kennedy Center and to this conversation. We use what we talk about on that day at the Art Summit as a sort of curriculum to follow the conversations and the engagement with the citizen artists throughout the year. We gather in the middle of the year for a retreat, and we say, what are you tackling? What are you wrestling with? What's on your mind? What's keeping you up at night? And what's working really well? And then how might we support those things? And so we were able to do, it was sort of a speed dating of who are the artists, the marketing team, the development team, the PR team, the digital team within the Kennedy Center that could help further your work. And we found that everyone, similar to Any Given Child, were tailor-making their journey through this. And then we've been finding all these unique avenues for us to come together and talk to audiences across the country, to be in workshops, professional development, keynotes. And so the voice of the citizen artist has been tremendous for us because this is the real work that's happening on the ground. You know, we're so proud, I'm so proud to just sit next to you, but so proud of this cohort and the work that you guys have done. And we're coming up on, like I said, April 16th is the next summit where this cohort will share what they've designed from their year of learning. And it comes out as performance, installation, facilitation, and they'll get to mentor the next cohort. So with that as context, I hope that gives you a little bit to get started. Jen, thanks so much for your head nodding. It's helping a lot. Hakim, I would love to just hear from your perspective. What has this program been for you?
It's been a game changer. I mean, all of you heard, for any artist who really, you know, just has their head down, you're just doing the work. You're not doing the work in your community because it's particularly, hopefully not because it's particularly self-aggrandizing. You're doing it because you see a problem and you have a creative solution to it. And you are always trying to beg people, other people to believe in your work and the things that you are doing. You're begging funders, you're begging policymakers, you're begging the police to stop shooting your kids, you're begging, and you're just doing this work all the time, and you're not ever thinking about what happens when I don't have to do this work anymore. What happens when the problem is no more. And I think that what the Kennedy Center does is it allows us a little bit of respite to say, hey, we see you, we see this work you're doing, and that over the course of it, it's a body of work that, you know, is more than just, hey, you're doing a good job, here's a pat on the back, you're an awesome human. It's like, no, it's actually quality art. It's like, it's risen to the level where it's actually generated, some sort of recognition for setting some sort of benchmark or some sort of bar, depending upon where you're at. And so for me, it was validating. It was at a point in my career where, you know, I'd been the poet laureate, and that served me really well. Albuquerque just puts me on its shoulders and carries me around the city all the time, and I'm so grateful. But it was also like, okay, you've kind of hit the ceiling here regionally, and you live here, so you're continuing to do the work because your son is only 10. You're going to be here for a while, and how do you get it out there in a broader sense? And so when Mario talks about literally having the full resources of the Kennedy Center at your disposal, at the retreat, it's literally like our marketing team have you thought of this? What about this? Like you lay it all out there about what you need, and they just come in with all the smart people with all the connections and say, have you thought about this? Maybe you should try this. Not just to help yourself. It's like, how do we expand your work so you can help more people? And I don't know how else I would get time for that or resources for that without this opportunity. It's huge. And I always say, like, as an artist, there's no roadmap to getting wherever you get, right? And I hope I haven't reached my zenith as far as my career and my writing. I hope I'm continually getting better, but there's no roadmap. You know, my thing to my students is I've only ever taken 2 writing courses, and one was a technical writing course in college. I wanted to be a soccer player, if you ask me, in high school, and I wanted to be a pediatrician, if you ask me, my first few years of college. And there was no clear path to who I would be today. And so to pretend that even the Kennedy Center has the answers to how you navigate and make it as an artist when so few do is disingenuous. So they can't give you a roadmap, but they can give you a really nice car to help you get there. And that's what they've done for me, so.
Just to note, the fellowship doesn't come with a car.
No,
That was
not,
a metaphor.
that was metaphor.
Which was awesome.
Sorry, being a poet.
I'm just teasing. You know, so I'm gonna say this thought that I have, but I would love to hear. This is really about. Folks always ask me describe who I should nominate, so I understand where do I focus my energy, right? How to identify the right person that's the right artist for this. And so this is just my personal way of looking at it. I think, you know, if you went to grad school, it's like everyone that I was in grad school with, we were all there because we were at some crossroads and we needed something to propel us to the next thing. I don't know what is in our secret sauce in terms of the way that we have selected, and maybe it's because of the layers from community to a cross-section of different folks at the Kennedy Center that have different expertise across the country, and then the artist being in that conversation, deciding to accept from the nomination to actually becoming one. Maybe it's because there's multiple levels, but I feel like it's not one age group. It's not an artist that's emerging or at the pinnacle. Everyone's at a different age and stage, right? But I feel like everyone's open to some kind of something new, some amount of change.
Yeah.
How would you talk about who is the artist that's ready for this kind of work?
Change and intersectionality. I think that I can only speak for my cohort, even though I got to meet a few of the members of the first cohort. But this idea that, you have to be able to play well in the sandbox with others. And we hope that if you do work in community, you already do that. But oftentimes, you get to be held up on a pedestal as that artist in your community. And when you go to this summit, all the other artists are held up on pedestals in their community too. So you gotta check your ego, right? And so I would say that to me is the first defining characteristic of who you nominate is the person who wouldn't nominate themselves. that usually is a good indicator that you're picking a person that's open to learning, to collaborating, to learning from other communities. We have this saying in New Mexico that what works because we're always compared to other cities like Austin, and it's like we could be the next Austin, and have you asked Albuquerque if it wants to be the next Austin? And so like as opposed to saying that this worked in Austin, this worked in Denver, we like to think that we have something to offer, and that a unique solution that arises out of our community could also benefit others as well. So somebody one day could say, do you want to be like Albuquerque, right? But you have to be open to going to Austin and going to Denver and saying, what can I learn from you? And it's my job as the creative or as the person from the place to figure out how I integrate it and use it to best help my community. And so I feel like in that way, that's who we are as citizen artists. We are this middle piece, this Rosetta Stone between city government and, the people, whatever that means, or between, two cities that have very different problems but can actually crowdsource or community source a similar solution. And so that's where artists have always functioned. They've always functioned in the realm of what's possible.
Yep.
They've always functioned as creatives, which is inherent in the world, creating something that didn't exist before. So.
Thank you for that. So, I always think of it, you're sort of in some ways an ambassador of the Kennedy Center, but you're also a champion of the local. And so these guys have been playing just a really unique role in conversations to talk from the individual perspective, but also talk about how an individual artist has a larger relationship with a big institution, and how we're both willing to learn and exchange, and that's been really interesting. So, we have classical artists, we have symphony musician.
In our cohort,
in this cohort, symphony musician, a composer.
Digital art.
El Sistema.
Yeah, muralist.
A muralist that really works
World-renowned muralist.
Yeah, with issues of immigration, and then our digital artist out of New York is really working with big data sets and turning those data sets into
data
sculptures.
artist. So he's a genius.
And so what I love is the impact that you guys have been having on the center, which is to think more broadly about other art forms. Because I love that word intersectionality, because there's this intersection where, we focus on the performing arts, but through education we focus on every art form. And so this has really pushed the center to think about our stages and spaces in different ways.
Sure. I think DeeDee Nichols, who, remember that name, activist, did a lot of work in Ferguson. And I don't want to speak for Dee, but I think we are the performing artists in the bunch. And I would characterize her work as people art, movement art, the art of getting people to organize around a particular issue and make progress, by any means necessary.
Yep.
And I know that her work now that is most charming to me is around community sourcing dinners, organic local food movement dinners, where you bring people together to charrettes, if you will, or salons to address a topic in their community. And this is also a conceptual artist who developed a glass casket that went up and down the streets of Ferguson and now sits in the blacksmith, as we call it, or the Blacksonian, the National African American Museum. So it's just, for me, and I'm humbled to be part of this group, because that's just a lot of what's possible for my work and what's next for my work. But I feel like that's where you want the dreamers in the room, but if you're a citizen artist, you do more than dream. You also know how to implement, you know how to get teams together. Like when Michelle works on the mural, she by hook or crook, if you will, gets whatever she needs to get the 50 people that are going to work on this mural in Cuba, and get it done. So you do have to be part administrator, facilitator, executor, and then still have the big ideas and the big visions.
So this summer, whenever they joined us at the center, we had some performance time on our Millennium Stage, and so it was really interesting for these artists that work in very different art forms from very different places, build these collaborative performances. And I don't know if I ever got to tell you this, but what I was really struck by, every single person is tackling an issue that's really important to them and close to you for whatever reason. And they were powerful and strong. And I watched this very mixed audience. It's our daily 6 p.m. show that we have every day. And I was just curious how they would respond. But what I saw was that all 7 citizen artists were so people first with their work. It wasn't necessarily issue first. It was, we care about people. We involve people in our work. We are representing people. And by leading with that, it welcomed everybody in, that they can make up their own mind about the issue, but leading with people was just so powerful. So that's my takeaway.
Well, it's powerful. This Millennium Stage performance that happens and is available to anybody in the DC area. If you go there
in the country,
really,
it's
your tax dollars at work, but it's available, and it's a huge opportunity, and you don't know who's going to show up. You never know who's going to show up. They set out about this many chairs or more, and it's really a beautiful thing. Like for us populist arts folks, it's like, yes, bring the art to the people every day at 6, right before dinner or right after dinner. It's a unique opportunity, and that and this are things that are resulting of the fellowship.
So I think before we get to questions, Hakeem was kind enough to agree to do a little performance. So I thought some spoken word might be a nice...
Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Right? Ooh, ooh.
So I'm gonna turn it over to my friend here.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you. So when I was trying to figure out what piece to bring to South by Southwest, because you kind of grow up wishing you could come to this thing, and here we are. I was thinking about my journey as an artist, and when Mario and I were putting together this presentation and looking at our Any Given Child work, K through 8, right? And then citizen artist work, right? Being a young or not so young now professional artist, and what's the connection? I didn't have an Any Given Child for me when I was younger, and I was a total jock. I played soccer in college. That was my tribe. That was my family growing up, and I was kind of a closet artist. And then, through a curious sequence of events, I came out as a poet, and it's been good to me. The universe agreed, right? And so, but I'm always interested in that trajectory and that journey. And when I go into a classroom, or now I'm a policy wonk person that helps bring artists into the classroom, I'm like, what did I not have? What was missing? And I was lucky, but how do I put more support and more encouragement around young students who are still trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, right? And maybe they want to be artists that save the world, and maybe they want to be an accountant, but that experience is still useful to them, it's still powerful to them, right? And the Kennedy Center has lots of data to prove that. So I figured I'd just bring something really personal about when I called home after losing my engineering scholarship. I was on a full ride of chemical engineer at VCU and lost that, and then it was like, you're gonna go to, I played soccer in college, so I transferred to a small D2 school, and I was doing that for a little while and was on the pre-med track. And then one day I called my parents and was like, I finally figured out what I want to be. And they were like, what? And I was like, a poet. And that's how my mom sounded. She laughed first. Actually, there was a long silence, and then there was a laugh. And then my mom is from New York. She's from the Bronx, so there were some expletives like, are you kidding me? And then they got on board about a year later, and then about 8 years later, I was poet laureate, and they're my biggest fans. But I share this piece with my students because I was like, when you say something outlandish like you want to change the world, people aren't going to believe in you, and they're going to care about you a lot, and they're going to want you to do what's safe and predictable, but you got to believe in yourself a little bit. And I feel like for me, that's my connection between the work I do with Any Given Child and the wonderful opportunity to be here in front of you now, thanks to the Kennedy Center. So it's a little bit of call and response in the African-American church tradition. When we say God is good, they say all the time. When we say all the time, God is good, you may have heard that before. But for this particular song, poem thing, I'm gonna finish with, I need you to say this part. How are you ever going to? But how you ever gonna? So when I raise my hand to ask the question, like they do in classrooms, you're gonna say, how you ever gonna? Boom, we got it, okay?
How you ever gonna?
Gonna get that bread. Got about 100 square feet, so he sleeps in my bed. God bless the boy, he healthy, and he needs to be fed. People are like, how you making meals out of poetry gigs? I say it's one part vision and one part ambition. Living off your dreams can be very nutritious. He's gonna be a soldier cause his daddy's on a mission. To rocket, he's the only star in me solar system. How you ever gonna graduate in Papa? You a lifetime student and a halftime father. How you gonna go on tour, man? Don't even bother. You better off giving custody to baby mama. It's when I stop him. Get out of my affairs. My baby got a second mama and it's called my career. He gonna grow up to be a monster and destroy y'all fears. And let me know if I did right or wrong all of these years. How you ever gonna get that bread? How you ever gonna go and get that fed? How you gonna make money off what's on your mind? I'm like, dang, homie, people do it all of the time. How you ever gonna graduate and pop? How you gonna keep it real when the dreams don't stop? They tell you what they woulda, coulda, shoulda did with their lives. Tell the haters, take a number, please stand in line. How you ever gonna? Cause I was born for this mission. Given the curse of spitting, rapper / politician. Working for my people so there ain't no commission. How the heck you supposed to profit off the gift that God gives you? when I got her permission to lose my religion, butt naked on the track, baptized in the rhythm. Yeah, they call it a lesson, a miracle and a blessing. I'm king in these juniors, so they call me Dr. Reverend, like Martin Luther sent me. The nuns want to repent me, saying I'm fast trying to lent me. Then they call it blasphemy, because the Pope don't represent me. I speak to God directly. Ties, testimonies, and confessions on the record. Then they tell me I'm irreverent and unconventional, but leaders do the unpopular and not what they are told. I tell them, thanks for your concern, apprehension, and bull, but I never been popular or done what I was told. How you ever gonna get that bread? How you ever gonna go and get him fed? How you gonna make money off what's on your mind? I'm like, dag, homie, people do it all of the time. How you ever gonna graduate and pop? How you gonna keep it real when the dreams don't stop? They tell you what they woulda, coulda, shoulda, did with their lives. Tell the haters take a number, please stand in line. I got love for my offspring and occupation. Paid to bring people together with my lip separation. Underrepresentation leads to verbal taxation. Patriot ditch digging up the dirt of my nation. You could call it frustration or shovel-ready projects, but building sandcastles in the hood is not an option. Construction or drugs the only way to buy a condo. Destruction or us the ultimatum is survival. So I do what I know is best for my child, yo. Off to work like hi-ho, me hijo, me amo. Daddy wore bucks cause I'ma fight for them dollars to send you to college. I swear to Your Honor, don't know how to be a father, no handbook or Bible, but told don't try to be perfect, be a model. They listen to what you say far less than they watch you. If I want him to achieve, I better try dang hard too. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
We really thought it'd be special to have Hakeem share some of his artwork with us, since this does have an arts focus, so thank you again. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
And I love the call and response piece, too.
Yes.
So we have a couple minutes to address a couple questions, which we got through the Slido platform, so maybe we can split these up. So are there nationwide video streaming access to programs from the Kennedy Center Rural Small Systems? So that is a great question. In terms of performances, we are actually working on that because there's challenges in terms of unions and musicians and access, but it's something that's really we're hearing quite often. And we figured this out through the symphony. There's a few performances, but also Millennium Stage is streamed live every single day, 365. And we have a website called Arts Edge, and that's our online curriculum learning tool. It's really dedicated to teachers and students. So there's a lot of video content there. Sometimes it's performance-based, sometimes it's interviews with the artist, but there's a lot of resources there. And then this one we could probably share. Were there any unexpectedly resistant groups to establishing these programs? What was their objection?
Yes.
Anonymously, maybe.
And I spoke a little bit to it earlier. You know, really in the gig economy, if I have a great relationship with one of the top schools, and by top, I mean probably parochial private school that has a bunch of money in Albuquerque, and I'm the poet they bring in, for me to relinquish that for the better good of the community and other schools who don't have those resources could be me moving myself out of a job, right? And that was the hardest part of getting people to kind of divorce themselves from that logic and saying, actually, what's good for the group is good for all. And so there were organizations that were at the table the first couple meetings and we never saw them again. Many times there were organizations who were like, well, we're fine and we have funding and we don't want to share it, you know? And so it's hard because I feel like that's not unique to artists. That's like a nonprofit industrial complex thing. And until we get past that thinking, that whole divide and conquer thing works really well.
I think we've also seen when those community arts teams are first getting together, we'll see some folks that might it doesn't feel like the right process for them, so they'll back out, and then they'll watch the progress or success and then kind of come back in later. You know, we all have different approaches to this work. Some of us are early adopters and ready to go. Some of us are digging our feet into the trenches, and then you have a middle group that's likely to come over to new ideas and new ways of working. And I think we see all of those thirds in every one of the community arts teams, and it takes the time that it takes for everyone to really be like, I see what this conversation is. I see how we're prioritizing kids. I see how we're prioritizing learning, but I might have to change the way I do business. It's not business as usual, it's business differently.
Or they don't know enough yet to understand that Kennedy Center is not coming in with a one-size-fits-all, do this and you'll be fine. They're actually coming in with a more iterative process that is, like any democracy, more time dependent, but that they will actually be able to make it their own thing. I think they originally see something coming from out of state, as we would say in New Mexico, and we're like, well, they're gonna tell us what to do, as opposed to, oh, we get to create this, now I'm interested.
Right, right. So we're going to wrap up. I always like to catch some summary words from these experiences. So if you guys could bring up my last slide for me, that would be great. But what I heard from this conversation that's going to stick with me, and I hope that you're taking this away as well, I heard a lot about responsiveness. I heard a lot about tailor-making programs and relationships, intersectionality, and then this role of artists as champions. So what Hakeem and I would love to invite everyone to is our upcoming Art Summit on April 16th, where we will be joined by our existing citizen artist cohort as well as a new cohort, and we're really addressing challenges across the areas of education, health and wellness, and finite resources, so it's pretty exciting.
Last year, Yo-Yo Ma and Condoleezza Rice did a duet at the Art Summit. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just saying.
You never know what surprises might be in store, but it's really an artist-centered approach to those challenges. And if you want to take a snapshot of that, and then I think we can go back to Hakeem and I and our contact information as we close out. So that's the slide before. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for being
here. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate
Thank you so
it.
much.